Have you ever had that feeling like the goalposts for being a grown-up have just been moved way, way down the field? You know, that the path your parents or grandparents took, stable job, buying a house, starting a family, seems so much harder today? Well, if that sounds familiar, you're not alone. And that's exactly what we're diving into today, using David Willetts' really influential book, The Pinch, as our guide. He argues that this feeling, it's not just in your head. It's real, and it's all rooted in a massive demographic shift. So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we're going to talk about that squeezed feeling that so many people have. Then, we'll dig right into the book's central idea, the absolutely massive impact of the baby boomer generation. From there, we'll look at how this all plays out in the economy, how it starts to strain our social fabric, and then we'll wrap it all up with a really powerful metaphor that just brings the whole idea into sharp focus. All right, first up, let's get right to the heart of the experience. We're not just talking about economics here, we're talking about this widespread sense, especially among younger people, that the traditional markers of a successful life are just slipping out of reach. This is really the question at the core of the book, and it's one that I'm sure resonates in so many households. Why does that journey to independence feel less like a clear, well-trodden path and more like a grueling uphill climb? And here's the book's answer. It's not just a feeling, and it's definitely not about younger generations not trying hard enough. No, he argues there's been a fundamental structural change in our society. The actual process of becoming an independent adult has become objectively, measurably harder, and it just takes so much longer. Wow, this quote from the book just nails the frustration perfectly, doesn't it? The dream is still there, people want the house, the family, the security. The problem, as Willetts frames it, isn't about the goal, it's that the tunnel to get to that light has become hidden, or maybe even blocked entirely. Okay, so if the pinch is the symptom, what's the actual cause? Well, according to the book, you can trace it all back to one of the most significant demographic events of the entire 20th century. These years, 1946 to 1964, the post-war baby boom. And Willetts' argument is that this wasn't just a lot of babies being born. It created a generation so enormous that its journey through life has literally warped the economic and political landscape around it, kind of like its own center of gravity. And this image here just lays out the real-world consequences so clearly. Just take a second and think about a 25-year-old back in, say, 1975. University was often free, housing was actually affordable, and pensions were designed to guarantee an income for the rest of your life. Now just compare that to the world a 25-year-old faces today. Crippling student debt, sky-high property prices, and these individual retirement pots where all the risk, it's on you. To make this point really simple and clear, Willetts tells a little fable. Imagine a tribe where one generation of hunters is just unusually large. Now, as they get older and they can't hunt anymore, their massive size means they have the most votes in the tribal council. So they vote to give themselves more of the tribe's resources, which ends up leaving the smaller, younger generation of hunters struggling to feed everybody, including themselves. So how does this actually happen in the real world? It's not necessarily about what people earn in their paychecks. The book argues the real story, the real mechanism of the pinch, is all about wealth and assets. And this chart tells so much of the story. For decades, the value of assets, especially property, has just gone through the roof, growing way, way faster than wages. What this did was create a huge financial windfall for people who got on the ladder early, while basically slamming the door shut for those who came later. This isn't just an income gap, it's a massive, ever-widening wealth gap. And, this isn't just some abstract economic trend. It has deep, real social consequences. Willetts points to research that shows how housing has become this major source of social friction and resentment, creating a really clear divide between the property-owning haves and the renting have-nots. And it goes way beyond just housing. This really points to a much broader shift in how our whole society handles risk. We've moved away from systems that used to pool risk across everybody. Things like secure pensions and strong social safety nets. And we've moved to a model where the individual has to carry that burden all by themselves, often by taking on a lot of personal debt. So all of this brings us to a more philosophical part of the book's argument. Willetts claims that these huge economic shifts aren't just changing what's in our bank accounts. They're actually eroding the unspoken agreement that holds our society together from one generation to the next. So how is it all supposed to work? Well, the book argues that healthy societies run on this principle called reciprocal altruism. It sounds kind of academic, but honestly, it's just the golden rule. It's the simple idea that we help each other out, trusting that someone will be there to help us later. It's the very glue that holds a cooperative society together. And to show how that glue can come unstuck, the book uses a classic parable called Rousseau's stag hunt. Okay, so picture this. A group of hunters can only catch a massive stag if they all work together. But then, one of the hunters spots a little hare, something small, but something they could easily catch all by themselves. Now they have a choice. Do they stick with the group for that big shared prize later, or do they break away and chase the hare for a small, guaranteed meal right now? Willetts' argument is that as a society, we are increasingly choosing to chase the hare. And the result of all that? It's a slow erosion of society's foundational trust. That implicit promise, that the young support the old, knowing that they too will be supported when they get old. It starts to fray. And that undermines the fundamental feeling that we are all in this thing together for the long haul. And this all leads us to the book's conclusion, which is summed up in a really powerful and, well, frankly, a pretty bleak metaphor that's taken from a classic French film. The entire thesis of The Pinch is kind of captured in this one story. It's a story that isn't about some big, open fight, but about a quiet, almost unthinking act that has absolutely devastating consequences for the person who comes next. So in the film, an old farmer secretly blocks a natural spring on his neighbor's land because he wants to buy that land on the cheap. The new owner, Jean, arrives full of hope, but he works himself to death, never understanding why his farm keeps failing. In the end, the old farmer gets the land, but it comes at a tragic cost. And this is the book's central moral question. Is one generation, maybe without even realizing the full consequences, blocking the spring for the next? Willetts wraps all this up by quoting the poet T.S. Eliot, and it's really an appeal to a deeper sense of historical responsibility. The point is, to make the right choices, we can't just think about what we need right now, in the present. We have to see ourselves as a single link in a much longer chain, one that connects the past to the future. And so that's where the book leaves us, with this question. It's not just an economic question or a political one. It's a moral one. It challenges all of us to look beyond the balance sheets and the election cycles and to ask a much more fundamental question about what our obligations really are to the people who are going to inherit the world we leave behind.